I died on a Wednesday evening. 2 cardiac arrests, 4 days of nothing. And when I finally clawed my way back into consciousness in a hospital bed I didn't recognize, with a nurse adjusting my IV like it was just another Tuesday for her, I looked at the empty chair beside me and asked one question. Where's my wife? The silence that followed told me everything the next 6 weeks would confirm. She was in Dubai. She knew I'd coded. She knew the doctors had pulled me back twice. And she decided, actively, consciously decided, that a 7-day trip with her college friend was more important than being in the room when her husband found out whether he was going to live or die. That was the first crack. Small, almost invisible. The kind you don't even feel until you press on it and your whole hand goes through the wall. What was behind that wall, who was behind it, is something I wasn't ready for. But the man who came back from the dead had one thing he'd never had before: patience. The kind that builds quietly, moves legally, and doesn't make a sound until every door in the house locks at once. Before I take you back to how all of this started, tell me the time and where you're watching from. I always love seeing how far my stories travel. Consider liking and subscribing, but do it only if you like what I do here. Now, let me walk you back a bit. My name's Dominic Ashford. I'm 45 years old, VP of Operations at a logistics firm called Callaway & Trent, the kind of job that sounds impressive at dinner parties and involves more spreadsheets than any grown man should be comfortable admitting. I drove a midnight blue SUV, maintained a lawn that made my neighbors quietly resentful, and smoked a brisket every 4th Sunday that had once made a grown man cry. I say that with complete sincerity. The man wept. His wife apologized on his behalf. By every reasonable measure, I was a good man living a solid life. 12-year marriage, nice house in a neighborhood with sidewalks and mature trees, the kind of street where people wave from their driveways even when they don't particularly like you. Vanessa and I had been together since I was 32. She was beautiful, sharp-tongued, confident in a way that drew people toward her like gravity. When she walked into a room, conversations shifted in her direction. When she laughed, you wanted to be the reason. I spent 12 years trying to be the reason. It was a Wednesday in October when Keith Barlow, my colleague, my lunch partner, the man who once accidentally replied all to the entire operations team with a message that read, "This meeting could have been a coma," found me collapsed between 2 cars in the parking garage at 6:47 in the evening. Keith told me later that I was on my side, eyes open but seeing nothing. He said he thought I was dead. He said he called my name 4 times and I didn't blink. He called 911. Then he called Vanessa. And this is where the story stops being about a heart attack. I don't remember the ambulance. I don't remember the paramedics cutting my shirt open or the shock that restarted my heart the first time. What I remember is silence, not the frightening kind, the kind that feels like sinking into still water. No pain, no noise, just a vast, weightless nothing. And then a voice, sharp, commanding, cutting through the dark like it had every right to be there. "Stay with me, Dominic. Stay with me." Dr. Nadia Farrow. I didn't know her name yet. I didn't know anything yet. I just remember thinking, with whatever fragment of consciousness I had left, "I'm trying, lady. I really am." I coded a second time. And somehow, for reasons that medicine can explain, but that still feel like something closer to a decision, my heart started again. When I fully came to, I was in the ICU. The room smelled like antiseptic and recycled air and the faint ghost of someone else's flowers. Tubes ran from places I didn't want to think about. Machines beeped with the persistent enthusiasm of devices that had no idea how irritating they were. Margot, my nurse, a woman in her 50s with short silver hair and the emotional temperature of someone who had watched hundreds of people wake up from the worst moments of their lives and had long since stopped being surprised by any of it. She was adjusting my IV when I opened my eyes. "There he is," she said, without looking up, like I'd just come back from the bathroom and not from the dead. "How long?" I managed. 4 days. I blinked. 4 days. "You coded twice," she said, finally glancing at me. "Dr. Farrow brought you back both times. You should send that woman flowers." I looked around the room. A vase of generic flowers on the windowsill, From the office, the card said. A get-well balloon with Keith with a cartoon grill on it, because even facing my possible death, the man remembered my personality, and a half-eaten box of truffles on the side table that I could only assume someone from my team had helped themselves to while I was unconscious. And an empty chair, right there, 2 feet from my bed, close enough to reach, perfectly empty. My wife, I started. Margot's face did something subtle. Not quite a flinch, more like a door closing very softly behind her eyes, the kind of micro-expression that belongs to someone who has opinions she is professionally required not to share. She's been informed, Margot said carefully. She called yesterday to check on your status. Called. Called, I repeated. Yes, I coded twice. 4 days unconscious. And she called? Margot smoothed the blanket across my legs with the efficiency of someone ending a conversation without technically ending it. I'll let Dr. Farrow know you're awake. Before I tell you what happened next, if stories like this are the kind you come back for, consider subscribing, but only if this one earns it. Vanessa called that evening. Her voice was warm, layered with all the right textures of worry, love, and carefully performed distress. An award-winning performance, honestly, if the award was for most convincing wife who isn't actually coming. Baby, I have been losing my mind. Are you okay? Is the doctor taking care of you? I've barely slept. I coded twice, Vanessa. A pause, just slightly too long. I know, and it's been killing me not being there. You have no idea how hard this has been for me. For her. My heart stopped. Twice. And it's been hard for her? Then come, I said. Silence. The kind that has weight to it. Dominic, the trip is in 5 days. We've already paid for everything. The flights, the resort, all of it. Simone and I have been planning this for months. You know this. Vanessa. I said her name the way you say it when you need the other person to understand that the next words out of their mouth will be remembered for a very long time. I almost died. And you're stable now? Something shifted beneath her voice, something harder, colder. You have an entire medical team, Dominic. You're in good hands. I will be there the second I'm back. It's 7 days. 7 days, and then I'm all yours. Who's going? I asked. Simone and the girls. Automatic, rehearsed, airtight. You know this. Simone and the girls. The most reliable phrase in our marriage for the last 2 years. The universal explanation for late nights, full weekends, and the slow, steady disappearance of a woman I used to know. Okay, I said. She paused, surprised, maybe relieved. Have a good trip, Vanessa. I hung up. I lay there, listening to the beep and hum of machines that literally dragged me back from nothing, and I felt something I didn't have a word for yet. Not anger, something beneath anger, something that settled at the bottom of my chest like a stone dropped into still water, slowly, permanently. It was clarity. Keith came to see me the next evening. He walked in carrying a paper bag from the Thai place we'd been arguing about for 2 years. He swore their pad Thai was the best in the city, and I maintained it was aggressively mediocre. Looked at the hospital tray on my table and said without a shred of hesitation, I'm not letting you die twice and then eat that. I laughed. First real one since waking up. He pulled up the empty chair, the one that should have been occupied by someone else entirely, and sat down like a man settling in for the long haul. And for a while, we just talked about nothing. Fantasy football, the Reply All incident, which I brought up solely because watching him relive the shame brought me genuine healing. Office rumors about whether our CFO was secretly writing a novel during board meetings. Normal things, easy things. The kind of conversation that lets you forget, just for a few minutes, that your body tried to quit on you and your wife couldn't be bothered to witness the results. Then, like someone turning off the lights, Keith's face changed. Has Vanessa been in? He asked. She's coming when she gets back, I said. Dubai first. Keith nodded, slowly, the way people nod when they're swallowing something they'd rather spit out. Keith. Yeah? Keith. What aren't you telling me? He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and stared at the floor for a solid 10 seconds. Keith Barlow is many things: loyal, loud, fundamentally incapable of keeping a surprise. This is the man who once tried to plan an office birthday party for me and texted every single detail directly to me instead of the group chat, then tried to convince everyone it was a decoy party. There was no decoy party. There was never a decoy party. Point is, Keith cannot hold a secret. It physically disagrees with him. And right now, sitting in that hospital chair under those fluorescent lights, he was carrying something that was visibly causing him structural damage. "Nothing, man," he said. "I just want you focused on getting better. That's it." I watched his face, every muscle working overtime to appear casual. "Keith, dumb, please." "Okay," I said, and I let it go. Not because I believed him, because I was tired, because I was weak, and because somewhere underneath the clarity that had settled in my chest, a small, quiet part of me already sensed the shape of what was coming, and that part wasn't ready to hold it yet. If you can feel what's coming, if something in this story already has your attention, type "I already know" in the comments, because what happened next is something I didn't see coming, even though every sign had been there for months. Vanessa flew out on a Friday morning. I know this because Keith mentioned the airport traffic without realizing he was confirming it. I know because Margot came in to check my vitals and asked with the careful neutrality of a woman who already knew the answer whether I had any family visiting this weekend. And I called the house twice on Friday afternoon and nobody picked up. 7 days. That's how long I lay in that hospital bed alone. Nurses changed my bandages. Dr. Farrow monitored my recovery with the focused precision of someone's instructions you didn't question. Keith showed up every other day with food and the aggressive emotional support of a golden retriever in a man's body. And Vanessa sent texts, thoughtful ones, photos of sunsets over the water, missing you, thinking about you, almost home, baby. All the warmth of a woman who cared deeply from a very comfortable distance. 7 days, getting stronger in body, while something else, something I hadn't fully named, quietly rearranged itself behind my eyes. The doctors said I came back from the dead. What they didn't know was that the man who came back wasn't entirely the same man who collapsed in that parking garage. Softer on the outside, quieter. He smiled more, actually. But underneath, in the place where the clarity lived, he was already watching. And he was already beginning to see. Let me tell you something about surviving a near-death experience that nobody puts on the inspirational posters. It doesn't fill you with gratitude and golden light and a sudden desire to climb mountains or hug strangers. What it actually does, what it did to me, is make you precise. Suddenly, everything is signal. Every word, every choice, every silence that stretches half a beat too long, it all registers. You stop hearing what people say and start watching what they show you. And what people show you when they think you're not paying attention is remarkable. They discharged me on a Thursday. Keith drove me home, carried my bag to the front door, and stood in the foyer with the worried energy of a man who wasn't entirely sure I should be left unsupervised. "I'm fine," I told him. "You died 12 days ago, and now I'm home. Go." He left reluctantly, checking over his shoulder twice like a parent dropping off a kid at camp for the first time. I stood in the kitchen of the house I'd lived in for 9 years and felt something I hadn't expected. Not comfort, not relief, just the hum of a space where something essential had already quietly left. I just hadn't identified what it was yet. Vanessa came home the next evening. She walked through the front door on a Friday, tanned and glowing, rolling a suitcase behind her with the easy rhythm of a woman returning from something wonderful. She smelled like airport lounge and expensive moisturizer and heat that had soaked into her clothes somewhere over the Arabian desert. I was sitting at the kitchen island, same seat, coffee going cold, watching the door. "Baby!" She dropped her bag and crossed the room in 3 steps, wrapping her arms around me. "Oh my God, look at you! You look so much better!" "Welcome home," I said. She kissed my cheek. She asked about my medication. She checked the discharge papers on the counter with the focused attention of a woman performing concern at a professional level. And I watched. The next morning, she was downstairs before I was. Coffee made, eggs scrambled, a new lightness in her that she attributed to rest and sunshine. She talked for 20 minutes about the resort, the skyline, a desert excursion where the sand dunes at sunset were, her exact words, spiritual. 20 minutes. And in 20 minutes of recounting a 7-day trip supposedly taken with her closest college friend, she mentioned Simone exactly once, in passing, like a footnote in someone else's essay. Simone, the woman whose existence had justified abandoning her husband's ICU bed. "Did Simone enjoy the desert tour?" I asked. A pause, microscopic, the kind only a man who has recently learned to read silence would catch. "She loved it." "Good," I said, sipping my coffee. "We should have them over sometime. You, me, Simone, her husband. What's his name again? I feel like you've mentioned him." Vanessa looked at me over the rim of her mug. Something flickered behind her eyes. Not panic exactly, more like a window being closed quickly in a room you weren't supposed to see into. "Terrence," she said. "Terrence," I repeated, smiling. "Let's do that." She smiled back. Neither of us meant a single word. I looked at her across that kitchen island, this woman I'd married 12 years ago, memorized the rhythms of, built an entire life beside, and I felt something I didn't expect. Not anger, not relief, something quieter, like watching the final minutes of a movie you already know the ending to, but sitting through anyway because you want to see if the credits confirm what you've suspected all along. She reached over and squeezed my hand. "I'm so glad you're okay." I squeezed back. "Me too." And I smiled, the same one I'd been wearing since I came home from the hospital, the one that sat perfectly on my face, warm and convincing and giving away absolutely nothing. The one that didn't reach my eyes. She didn't notice. Nobody noticed. Not yet. I went back to the office 2 weeks later, against Dr. Farrow's firm recommendation and Keith's borderline theatrical protests. Keith met me at the elevator with the energy of a man who had been rehearsing a monologue in his bathroom mirror. "Before you say anything," he started. "Good morning, Keith. I just want you to know that I respect your decision, I support you completely, and also you look like you haven't slept since 2019. "Appreciate the honesty," I said. "Missed you too." We walked to our offices. He stopped at my door, leaning against the frame, arms crossed. His face shifted. The same shift I'd seen in the hospital. The light switch flipping off. "Dom." "Yeah." "Are we going to talk about it?" I sat down at my desk. Same desk where I'd been working the evening my heart stopped. Someone had cleaned the surface. The mouse pad was new. Keith, probably. "Talk about what?" I said. "You know what." I looked at him. Keith Barlow. Reply all catastrophe. Decoy party architect. A man whose face was structurally incapable of concealing anything more complex than mild surprise. And right now, that face was holding something that was visibly tearing him apart from the inside. "How long have you known?" I asked. He closed my office door, sat down across from me, rubbed his hands on his knees like a man trying to generate the courage through friction. If you've ever had a moment where someone sat down in front of you and you knew, before a single word left their mouth, that everything was about to change, if you've ever felt the weight of a room shift like that, then you already understand what I felt. And if this is hitting close to home, you probably already understand why people subscribe to stories like this. What Keith told me next is something I replayed in my head every night for 6 weeks. It had started, he said, about 8 months earlier. A quarterly client appreciation event at the Langford Hotel downtown. Vanessa had come as my guest. Normal, expected. She always came to those things. She was better at them than I was, honestly. The kind of woman who could talk to a stranger for 10 minutes and make them feel like the most interesting person in the building. Preston Hale had been there that night, an architect at Merritt & Co., the firm that occupied the 6th floor of our building. Keith described him as the kind of man who wore confidence like a tailored jacket, 42, recently divorced, the sort of easy self-assurance that made people in his orbit either admire him or distrust him on instinct. Keith had noticed them on the terrace, talking, not briefly, not casually, the kind of conversation that has its own gravity. He hadn't thought much of it then. He started thinking about it 4 months later when he ran into Vanessa at a wine bar on Halsted Street on a Saturday afternoon, a Saturday I was in Denver for a regional conference. She wasn't alone. The man sitting across from her, close, laughing, leaning in, was Preston Hale. "I didn't want to assume," Keith said. "I could have been wrong." "But you weren't," I said. He shook his head slowly. "I should have told you sooner. You're telling me now." "Dom." "Keith," I held my hand. "I'm not angry at you, I promise." He looked at me the way everyone had been looking at me since the hospital, scanning for the old version, the loud one, the argument that referees at rec league games and debated brisket technique with strangers at hardware stores. That version was still in there. He just had a new roommate now. "What are you going to do?" Keith asked. I considered the question carefully, not what to say, but what was actually true. "I'm going to pay attention," I said. "That's it? That's everything." He didn't understand yet, but he would, because paying attention, truly, quietly, without warning anyone you're doing it, is the most dangerous thing a betrayed man can do. I want to be clear about something. I did not hire a private investigator. I did not go through her phone while she slept. I did not follow anyone to a parking lot or create a fake social media account or do any of the theatrical things that make for compelling television and questionable legal standing. I simply watched, and Vanessa, without knowing she was being watched, showed me everything. Preston Hale, I learned through nothing more dramatic than a LinkedIn profile and our building's tenant directory, worked late on Mondays and Wednesdays. Vanessa, I noticed, had started attending a Pilates class on Monday and Wednesday evenings approximately 6 months ago. Vanessa has never done Pilates. This is a woman who once referred to a flight of stairs as aggressive cardio. The image of her voluntarily lying on a reformer machine, performing controlled breathing exercises, was, to put it generously, one of the more creative fictions our marriage had ever produced. I also noticed her phone, which had lived on the nightstand for 12 years, now charged face down on the bathroom counter. That certain calls sent her drifting to the back porch, where she laughed in a way I hadn't heard in years, lighter, younger, like a woman remembering something she'd forgotten she could feel. That she bought new perfume without mentioning it. That she wore earrings to Pilates. Earrings to Pilates. Small things, each one individually explainable. Together, they assembled a portrait so complete it was almost elegant. And then there was Simone, the indispensable best friend, the woman whose existence had justified a Dubai trip over my hospital bed. In the 3 weeks since Vanessa's return, I had heard Simone's name exactly 4 times, always brief, always casual, always placed into conversation like a prop set on a stage and quickly removed. In 2 years of hearing about Simone, I had never met her, never spoken to her, never been in the same room. For a woman who apparently occupied every other weekend of my wife's life, she had the physical presence of a roomer. I didn't say a word. I started making calls of my own. Victor Stain had been my attorney for 7 years, the kind of man who kept his glasses on a chain around his neck, perpetually prepared to read fine print that would ruin someone's afternoon. He spoke the way contractors measure, carefully, twice before cutting once. I walked into his office on a Thursday and closed the door. "Dominic," he said, "you look well, all things considered." "I need to understand something," I said. Hypothetically, if a man wanted to quietly restructure his assets before a significant personal transition, legally, cleanly, irreversibly, what would that process involve? Victor studied me over those glasses for a long moment. How significant a transition? The kind that changes an address. He nodded slowly, opened his desk drawer, pulled out a legal pad. "Sit down," he said. The weeks that followed were the strangest of my life. On the surface, everything held together. Dinner at the table, television on the couch, Vanessa asking about my medication, my recovery, my follow-up appointments with Dr. Farrow. She was attentive now,
Tender even, the specific tenderness that guilt produces, which feels almost identical to love if you're not paying close attention. I was paying attention. And here's what would surprise you, what surprised me. I wasn't miserable. I cried once, in the shower, 3 days after Keith told me. 5 honest minutes of grief for the marriage I thought I'd had. Then I turned the water off, dried my face, and made dinner, because the man who came back from that hospital bed had decided something, quietly, permanently, in the place where the clarity lived. He was not going to grieve in front of someone who wouldn't notice the tears. He was not going to plead. He was not going to offer her the mercy of a warning. He was simply going to prepare, quietly, completely, and let the consequences arrive on their own schedule. And every evening, while Vanessa kissed me goodbye and drove to Pilates classes that didn't exist, Victor Stain moved another piece quietly into place, legally, precisely, irreversibly.
I remember the last normal evening with the kind of clarity that only arrives after something has already ended. It was a Friday night, some crime drama on the television that I couldn't have identified under oath. Vanessa was curled on her end of the couch, feet tucked beneath a throw blanket, scrolling her phone during commercials and laughing at the screen every few minutes with the effortless comfort of a woman who believed, completely and without question, in the permanence of everything around her. I sat 2 cushions away, close enough to reach her if I wanted to. I didn't reach. I watched her instead. Not with anger. Not with the sharp, jagged bitterness you might expect from a man who knew what I knew by then. I watched her with something quieter, something that had taken weeks to settle into its final form. Sadness. Clean and uncomplicated. The kind that doesn't raise its voice or slam doors. The kind that just sits in your chest and says, very gently, "This is the last time you will sit here like this. Pay attention." So I did. Let me tell you something about being underestimated by the person who is supposed to know you best. There is a particular kind of power in it. Vanessa looked at me every day and saw exactly who she expected to see. The reliable man, the quiet man, the man who made coffee in the morning and asked about her day and never once gave her a reason to look closer. She had been looking at that version of me for so long that she never noticed when he stopped being real. By that Friday evening, everything was in place. Victor had filed the divorce papers over a week earlier. The trust was established and airtight. The joint account had been legally restructured down to enough to cover 2 months of household bills and nothing more. Every transfer documented, every step reviewed. Over the past 2 weeks, I'd been quietly moving my personal belongings out of the house, a box at a time. Books from the study, family photos from the hallway, my father's watch from the bedroom drawer, the grill cover folded into my trunk on a Wednesday afternoon when Vanessa was at a Pilates class that didn't exist. The slow, careful disappearance of a man from a life he'd built for 9 years, performed so gradually that the woman sleeping beside him never noticed the walls getting barer. That told me everything I needed to know about where her attention had been. "You're staring," she said, glancing over with a half-smile. "Just thinking," I said. "About what?" I looked at her. This woman I'd married 12 years ago, who used to fall asleep with her head on my shoulder and her hand resting on my chest, as if checking, even in sleep, that my heart was still going. The same heart she couldn't be bothered to visit when it stopped. "About how fast things change," I said. She reached over and squeezed my hand. "You've been through so much, baby, but you're okay now." I squeezed back, gently, for the last time. "Yeah," I said softly, "I'm okay now." Moments like this are exactly why I pay attention now, because the truth doesn't always announce itself with sirens. Sometimes it just sits beside you on the couch, under a throw blanket, holding your hand and calling you baby, while everything real has already walked out the door. She turned back to the television. I sat there holding the hand of a woman who was already gone and felt the last thread of something I called my marriage stretch thin, tremble, and silently snap. If you've been watching for a while and want stories like this to keep coming, it genuinely helps if you hit that like button and subscribe. Most people never do, but it's what keeps all of this going. Thank you, for real. Tomorrow was Saturday.
She had brunch plans. Simone, naturally, mentioned at dinner with the practiced ease of a woman whose alibi had never once been questioned. Tomorrow, for the first time, it would be.
The morning everything came apart started with eggs. A Saturday. One of those mornings where the sky couldn't commit to being gray or blue and settled on both. Like even the weather knew something was coming and couldn't decide how to feel about it. I was up at 6, showered, dressed, made coffee, scrambled eggs, set 2 plates on the kitchen island, and sat down with the careful stillness of a man who had already decided everything and was simply waiting for the world to catch up. Vanessa came downstairs at 8:15, hair done, light makeup, wearing the kind of casually polished outfit a woman puts together when she wants to look good for someone at brunch. She had mentioned it the night before, Simone, naturally. "You're up early," she said. "Made eggs. Sit. Eat before you go." She looked briefly surprised. I'd been cooking more since the hospital, another behavior she'd attributed to my renewed appreciation for life. Another thing she was wrong about. We ate together, 2 people performing a perfectly normal Saturday morning in a marriage that one of them knew had already ended. She talked about repainting the guest bathroom. I nodded. She mentioned a restaurant she wanted to try the following week. I said that sounded nice. Inside, I was watching the final seconds of a countdown I had started weeks ago. She kissed me on the cheek at 9, said she'd be back by 3. Walked out the front door with the confident rhythm of a woman whose routine had never once been interrupted by suspicion. I stood at the window and watched her car back out, turn left, and disappear. Then I picked up my phone and called Victor Stain. "It's time," I said. "Everything is ready," he said. I set the phone down, finished my coffee, and began. Here is what Vanessa did not know. She did not know that Victor had quietly and legally restructured the majority of our shared assets into a private trust, one I controlled entirely. The documentation was thorough, airtight, and devastating. She did not know that the joint savings account now held exactly enough to cover 2 months of household expenses and nothing more. Every transfer legal, every document filed and reviewed 3 times. She did not know that this house, the one she'd redecorated 3 times and treated as permanently hers, was entirely in my name. When we bought it 9 years ago, Vanessa's credit hadn't qualified for the mortgage. Title, deed, loan, all under my name and my credit. Victor reminded me of that during our second meeting. Helpful man. She did not know I filed for divorce 9 days ago. And she did not know about Pauline. Pauline is Vanessa's mother, 73 years old, sharp as a scalpel and twice as direct. The kind of woman who says exactly what she means and has never once in 70 decades considered softening it for anyone's comfort. Pauline called me in the hospital, not Vanessa, Pauline. The day after I woke up, while her daughter was already poolside somewhere in Dubai. She cried on the phone for 30 minutes, told me she was sorry, told me she didn't understand what had happened to her daughter, said things a mother probably shouldn't say aloud, but truth has a way of forcing words from people when the weight of holding them becomes unbearable. We stayed in touch after, and it was Pauline, during a quiet call 2 weeks ago, who mentioned almost casually that she was surprised Vanessa still spent so much time with Simone, considering Simone moved to Portland over a year ago. I let that sentence sit in the air for a very long time. Then I thanked her, told her I loved her, and hung up. Portland. Over a year. Every girls' weekend, every brunch, every Dubai trip, built on the name of a woman who lived 1,000 miles away and almost certainly had no idea she was the foundation of someone else's fabricated life. The last box went into my trunk at noon. I placed the evidence folder on the kitchen island beside the divorce papers, made a fresh pot of coffee, sat down. She said she'd be home by 3. I checked the clock, took a breath, and waited. She walked through the front door at 2:51. I know the exact time because I was watching the clock with the calm focus of a man who had already accepted that the next 20 minutes would dismantle 12 years of his life and had made peace with every second of it. I heard her keys, the door, her heels on the hardwood. And then Silence. The kind of silence that happens when someone walks into a space they know by heart and realizes, before a single conscious thought forms, that something is fundamentally wrong. The hallway photos were gone. The bookshelf in the living room was half empty. The wall where our wedding portrait had hung for 9 years now held nothing but a faint rectangular outline and a single nail. "Dom?" Her voice was careful. "Testing. In here," I said. She appeared in the kitchen doorway. Her eyes found me first, sitting at the island, coffee in hand, perfectly still. Then they moved to the counter. The folder. The papers. The quiet, organized evidence of everything I had been building while she thought I was simply healing. "What is this?" she said. "Sit down, Vanessa." She sat. The way people sit when the ground has shifted and no surface feels safe anymore. I slid the papers across the island. "Divorce papers. Filed 9 days ago. Victor Stain handled everything. You remember Victor. He did our will." I let that settle. "The house is in my name. Always has been. Your credit didn't qualify when we bought it. Title, deed, loan, all mine." Victor reminded me. Her face lost color so gradually it was like watching a sunrise run in reverse. "The joint account covers bills through January. After that, I'd suggest getting your own attorney. You'll be treated fairly, Vanessa. I have zero interest in being cruel. That's not the man I am." "Dom, please, whatever you think." "Simone moved to Portland 14 months ago." Silence. Complete, airless silence. "Your mother told me. Pauline and I have been talking since the hospital. The day after I woke up, while you were on a beach in Dubai. She mentioned recently that she was surprised you still spent time with Simone, given that Simone has been living 1,000 miles away for over a year." I opened the folder. "Preston Hale, 6th floor. Keith saw you together at a wine bar on Halsted Street 5 months ago, a Saturday I was in Denver. Your Pilates schedule matches his late nights perfectly. And Vanessa," I paused, "you have never done Pilates in your life. You once called a flight of stairs cardio." She was crying now. Not the immediate, performative kind, the slow, reluctant kind, the body admitting what the mouth still refuses to say. Here is what I've learned about tears that arrive only after consequences. They sound like remorse, they look like regret, but they are not the same thing. She wasn't grieving what she'd done to me, she was grieving what she'd lost. The quiet, dependable man who never looked too closely and never asked the wrong questions. "Who are you?" she whispered. I considered the question carefully. She deserved a real answer. "I'm the man who coded twice on a Wednesday evening," I said, and came back paying attention. Type "he earned this" in the comments if you felt that in your chest. She stared at me for a long moment. Then she stood, slowly, picked up her purse, and walked toward the door. She stopped in the foyer, turned back. "Did you ever think about just asking me? Talking to me?" I looked at her, standing in the doorway of a house that no longer held her name, asking why I didn't fight for a marriage she'd already abandoned from 30,000 feet over the ocean. "I did," I said quietly, "every single day. And every single day you drove to a class that didn't exist and came home smelling like someone I'd never met." She left at 3:14. I stood at the kitchen window and watched her car pull out of the driveway for the last time. The street was quiet. The light was doing that late afternoon thing where everything turns golden and looks softer than it actually is. Then I picked up my phone and called Keith. "Come over," I said. "Bring something worth eating. I just ended my marriage and I refuse to do it on an empty stomach." Keith arrived 40 minutes later with ribs from the smokehouse on Wicker Street and the expression of a man who had been holding his breath for weeks and was only now allowing himself to exhale. We sat at the kitchen island, same chairs, and I told him everything. The papers, the folder, the Simone revelation, the look on her face when months of fabricated alibis and a best friend living 1,000 miles away collapsed in a single conversation. He listened without interrupting, which for Keith Barlow was a physical achievement I genuinely admired. When I finished, he sat back, stared at the ceiling, and let out a breath that sounded like it had been stored somewhere near the bottom of his lungs since October. "Dom," he said, "you are the quietest, most terrifying man I have ever had the privilege of eating ribs with." I laughed. A real one, full and unguarded, starting in the same chest that had flatlined on a Wednesday in October, and somehow, against every reasonable probability, decided to keep going. It felt like the first honest sound I'd made in months. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. Clean, fair, exactly what Victor promised. Vanessa got what the law required and nothing beyond it. Preston Hale, I'm told through Keith's enthusiastic reporting, quietly left Merritt and Cole once word of the affair made its way through the building, the kind of professional consequence that arrives when a consultant's personal choices become the entire lobby's favorite topic. Keith delivered this update with the energy of a man who considered it a personal spiritual victory, which I found both excessive and completely justified. I sold the house, bought a smaller place on the other side of the city. Less space, less performance, less maintaining a life designed to look perfect from the outside while something essential rotted underneath. Just enough room for one man, a decent kitchen, and a back patio where a very good grill sat waiting for Sundays that actually meant something. Dr. Farrow cleared me at my last follow-up. She shook my hand and said, "You look better than any patient I've brought back twice." "I feel better than I ever have," I said, and I meant every word. Margot, steady, seen everything Margot, passed me in the corridor on my way out. She looked me over with the practiced assessment of a woman who had spent decades learning the difference between people who heal and people who simply survived. "Still standing, Mr. Ashford?" I smiled. The real kind, the kind that reaches the eyes and doesn't need to convince anyone of anything. "Margot," I said, "better than I have any right to be." That should have been the ending. The clean, quiet, satisfying ending of a man who lost everything, rebuilt from the ground up, and walked into a smaller, truer life with his eyes open and his chest clear. But life doesn't write clean endings. Not really. Not when other people are still holding pieces of your story that you thought you'd already put down. It was a Tuesday evening, not long after the papers were signed. I was on the back patio seasoning a brisket because some rituals are sacred and non-negotiable when the doorbell rang. I opened the door. Vanessa. She looked different, thinner in the face, quieter in a way I'd never seen on her before, not the practiced quiet of someone managing a performance, but the raw, unsteady quiet of someone who has recently run out of scripts. Her eyes were red but dry. She'd been crying before she arrived, not during. That distinction mattered. "I know I shouldn't be here," she said. "Then why are you?" She opened her mouth, closed it, looked down at her hands, and then she said something I was not prepared for, something that shifted the ground beneath my feet in a direction I had not anticipated and could not immediately process. "I'm pregnant, Dom. 17 weeks. The patio light hummed above us. Somewhere down the street, a neighbor's sprinkler clicked on, rhythmic and indifferent. "Is it?" "It's yours," she said. The timeline before everything fell apart. November, those last weeks before it all came apart. I stood in that doorway, this man who had died twice, rebuilt once, and finally learned to trust the clarity that almost dying had burned into him. And I felt something I hadn't felt since the night I woke up in the ICU. Uncertainty. Because this wasn't a lie I could file paperwork against. This wasn't an alibi I could dismantle or a cassette I could restructure. This was a human being, a possibility, sitting at the intersection of everything I'd walked away from and everything I hadn't yet decided I wanted. Keith, who I'd called on instinct the moment she left, sat on the other end of the phone in a silence so heavy I could feel it through the speaker. He didn't say a word. He was waiting. Everyone was waiting. Vanessa had asked me one question before she left, just one, standing on the porch step, her hand resting on the barely visible curve under her jacket, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is there any version of this where you'd let me back in?" I stood in that doorway for a long time after her car disappeared. The brisket was still on the counter, the patio lights still humming, the street still quiet. And I thought about clarity, about how it saved me, about how it showed me the truth when everyone else was performing, about how it rebuilt me into someone I was finally proud of being. And then I thought about mercy, about whether clarity and mercy could exist in the same man at the same time, about whether the version of me that came back from the dead had room for one more resurrection,
Not his own time, but something else entirely. I picked up the phone. Keith was still there, still waiting. "Dom," he said quietly, "what are you going to do?" I opened my mouth to answer. "Tell me which part of the story hit you the hardest. Tell me where you're watching from. I always love knowing how far these stories travel. And if you want to be here when part 2 drops, you already know what to do."